So good afternoon and welcome to the webinar on reporting on governance and data quality in BlueDolphin. My name is Tom de Ridder. I'm a consultant and the platform architect for BlueDolphin at Value Blue. My co-host this afternoon is Nadia. She's the marketing event manager at Value Blue. Nadia will be keeping track of your questions if you have them during this webinar, and will ask them back to me or report them back to me when it's time to answer questions. Some practical stuff. If you have a question, there is a question mark icon on the right side of your screen, which you can use to ask questions. Please feel free to do it. We will decide, or I will decide, when to answer the questions, either in between the presentation or just after the presentation. We also have some time for Q&A. I'll be asking you a question soon using the poll functionality of this of GoToWebinar. Please feel free to answer. We're going to give you a little bit of time to answer the question, but that can also be found on the right-hand side of your screen. This webinar is being recorded and we will have a replay for you available. You will get an email that contains a link to the replay, the slides that we used in this webinar, and lastly, a feedback form. Please do fill out the feedback form because it helps us increase the quality of our webinars. So thank you for that. Now, for the webinar itself, we have an agenda on for this webinar. A couple of main things: why do reporting at all in BlueDolphin? How to control and manage your data? How to keep your data up to date? Getting the most out of your data? Dashboards and Q&A. And to start this webinar off, I will launch a poll, and I would like to ask you to fill out the question. The question for the poll. If it's okay, you can see it now. Yeah, here we go. We'll wait a couple of seconds for most people to have voted. Okay, so the poll's been open for a minute. I'm closing the poll now to go ahead. So the questions that I have was, how do you use reporting? Well, 30% of you answered A, I use the built-in reporting functionality. 6% of you answered that you're using OData feed with an external BI tool. 28% of you said that you use both A and B, so you're using the built-in reporting as well as the OData feed. And 1/3 of you stated that you never use reporting. Well, we've got something for everybody here. So thank you for the answers. Let's move on with the first question. Why do reporting at all? Well, when you're using BlueDolphin, you obviously accumulate a lot of data in your BlueDolphin site. You have a lot of objects and relationships, and you hold information about those objects. You have views, and you want to make sure that the data that you have in BlueDolphin is as correct as possible. It needs to reflect either the current situation, or at least needs to be completely filled in as you want it. Reporting gives you the chance to control and manage the data governance and quality on this, and I'll go into detail in that later. Another reason why you want to use reporting is you use views probably, and probably you use conditional layout. or conditional colors to tell kind of a visual story to your different stakeholders on different levels. Most of our customers have some sort of view which they use to explain a situation to other people. But sometimes these views and conditional layouts are not sufficient to tell the entire story. So you need a different form of telling the story, and that's where reporting comes in. It kind of gives you another means of visualization to get your point across. I will have some examples of that as well. So the first part is controlling and managing your data. The main goal of controlling and managing is that your objects and your relations and your views are complete, meaning that all the information on an object is filled in, or that relations exist on objects where you need relationships, and that views contain all the objects that they need. So there are several ways of showing you this. Let me move to my BlueDolphin instance. In this demonstration, I'll be using a demonstration site called Liberty Energy, which is based around a fictitious energy supplier. And this energy supplier has a lot of objects in the site across a variety of stuff, business strategy, migration, implementation, extension, and then the architecture layers are well filled with objects. So how do I know what kind of objects, what objects are complete? Well, as you are aware, or some of you are aware, we have a functionality called completeness, which enables you to gain insight in how much of a question, how many questions, or how much of a particular set of questions have been answered in a particular object. For example, here's the completeness bar for this particular object. It's 100%, meaning that all the application, all the questions that have been marked with a star have been answered for this particular question. I'm not going to go in too much detail on how to set up completeness levels. You can obviously find this in the documentation, but if it's really necessary, I could explain it to you later or in a separate call. But the main idea is that you use it to make sure that all the information that you need for a specific object type is filled in. Now, how to report on that? We have a report called object completeness. So what this is basically is, for example, is filtered on application components. By the way, we're looking at the internal BI solution that we supply with BlueDolphin. And what we see here is application components that have a completeness that is less than 100. So in here, you see all the applications that are not yet filled in fully. And as with all reports, you can filter them on completeness, for example, or on the object title, or on any other column that you want. But using these kinds of lists will give you information on what you still need to do in terms of completeness of your objects. Obviously, we can also switch this to a different object type. For example, I don't know, a business process maybe. And you see that there's virtually nothing filled in here. Let's try something else. Let's try a location. Also, I'll better try something else. Function then. No, okay. Apparently in this site you only have application components that are interesting here, but you can switch this up to any definition that you need. Mostly it's about the objects that you want to accumulate the most information about, and usually application components and that kind of stuff are mostly interesting for that. So completeness on object level, this is the way to go. This is the report you can use. Now, another situation which you encounter a lot is that an object or object types, for example, application components again, they usually need to have some relation to some type of objects. For example, if you want to do anything with application functions, it's easy if you have a report which says which application object has a relationship with at least one application function. So this is an example of a report which shows you that. Here we have all the application components, and it shows all the number of relationships that this application component has with a application function. Now, all the objects that have 0 relationships obviously still need some relationships, so you can zoom in on that to make sure that you have you add relationships to functions for those objects. The same thing in this example also goes for processes. You may want to connect or relate a application object to a business process. Now you see in this list that there's not many applications that are hooked up to a business process. There are some, but once again, this gives you an overview of what you still need to do in terms of completeness for your objects and relationships. You can create a list like this for any type of object. You can also create for processes, for example, that need to be connected to actors, for example. So there's all sorts of ways that you can set up these kinds of reports. Finally, you also want to have some information on views, like, for example, what objects are on my view. So we have this report. And basically what this does is show you all application components on a particular view. Within this BlueDolphin instance, we have an application overview. Let me show you that. Where is it? And this application overview is a view that you want updated so that it contains all the views, all the objects that are in your current environment. This list will show you just what that is. I could also try a different view with different types of objects. For example, let me try business processes, and where is it? Process architecture, current state. This will show you all the business processes on that particular view. So this is once again easy to see in a single report what objects are on your views. One other thing we come across is that you want to keep these kinds of views as current as possible. So there's one guy, for example, which is responsible for keeping this view up to date. Well, let's say other people add applications to the landscape, but they don't put it on this particular view. You want to have reporting based on that. There's another report, which I can show you, is where it shows objects which are not on a view. This view gives you all the application components there are in this particular site, and it also shows you whether that application component is on that particular view. This view, to be precise. Now you can create these kinds of views for any sort of view, obviously, that you need fit. In this case, we created it specifically for the application overview, but you can create them for any other view that you need. Also, that gives you insight on whether your views are complete, whether your views contain all the objects that they need to contain. Getting information about your objects can be done in various ways. As you might know, you can have people log into BlueDolphin. You can ask them to fill in information for a particular object, but there's also a way of sending out a guest link. Guest link is a link that is sent out to anybody. It can be somebody that does not have a BlueDolphin account, or even if he has a BlueDolphin account, you can send out a guest link. The user that receives this guest link will then get a mail with a link so that he can fill in information for that particular object. Now, because it's not as easy to track how many guest links you send out by just going into objects and clicking on manage guest link, we've created a report here, which shows you exactly that. So here is a overview of all the guest links that have been created, when they've been created, when the expiration date was, to whom it was sent, and what the link exactly was. But to make it more interesting, up in the end here is the number of times that particular guest link has been opened. For example, if it says 0 here, it means that no, this link has never been opened anyway. And the same thing goes for saves. So you know when this link actually has been used properly, so that you might close it up or don't have to inform the user anymore that a guest link is still open. Also something that a lot of our customers request to do. And by the way, you have a good overview of what you still need to do. On top of that, also customers ask us for a list with users and their roles. It's something that is interesting in terms of governance. How many users do I have? Which roles do they have? It's a little easier to see it this way than to go into the user screen and then click on all the users. Finally, customers asked us for overviews on roles and permissions. For example, in this site, we have a couple of roles, and this tab or this table actually explains what permissions each role has on each questionnaire. For example, you have your read-only users here, which have limited security on, which can only do read-only, only have read-only permissions on some of the application, some of the questionnaires. And for example, administrators can basically do anything. So this is an overview for you to see all the roles and permissions at once. So that is how you control and manage, or are examples of the way you control and manage your governance for your BlueDolphin site, making sure that you are complete. Are there any questions regarding this particular subject?
Yes, there are two questions, Tom. The first one is, do you have a graph visualizer for applications to see how one application is connected to others by depth level?
Well, do I have is too much of a word. It's too much, but we can definitely create it. This is kind of a specialty item. If you want to do this in reporting, it can be achieved using OData, we know, but you might not be aware of the fact that it is also possible by using the derived relationship functionality within a view. Let me show that at the Q&A because it's not really relevant to this subject, I think. So let's park that for later on.
Okay. The next one, are these reports standard, or can you send the columns you use in the reports like the guest link status?
The reports I've shown you are partially custom in the sense that they use data sources which have been created by me for this purpose. But you can basically use any columns you want. So you can use any column in any questionnaire that you need. So that would indeed be the same as in a questionnaire where you can say, well, send out information about this questionnaire. You can do also the same thing in a report. Hope this answers your question, Jan.
And the next
Any more questions?
Yeah, there are others. The other question is, do you also provide information on how to create a report like that? For example, especially interested in objects on views.
Yeah, so what I need to add to this is that these reports use a preset data sources, which we can supply you with in your BlueDolphin tenant. There's not enough time and room in this particular web session to go into those details, but I'll be happy to have a quick call with you on how to do this afterwards. The details for this are in the slide deck later on. So that's something we could do a one-on-one on. And if there's a lot of information on it, we could also consider doing a webinar on creating these kinds of reports.
Okay, will there be templates available for these governance reports?
Yes, we intend to put together these governance reports and making them available for your particular BlueDolphin site.
And the next two questions are more or less the same. Are the shown reports available on the community page for us to create ourselves, to copy from? And the last one is, do we get the reports Tom showed to our disposal?
Well, I think I answered that with the previous question. I think it's good that we stay in contact with each other, for example, using support, so we can provide you with these data sources, so you can start creating these reports yourself. And I think on request, you can also make these reports available in your own site because they're really generic. They're not bound to a specific implementation for a specific customer. So I guess we can do that. We'll have to get in touch with your account manager regarding this. And then there's a last one.
Yeah, it's also the same
Right?
concerning the techniques.
Okay, yeah, we're going to work on that. This is now handled through account management. So get in touch with your account manager and we can set stuff up. Okay, a lot of questions. Let's move on to the next item. Once you've established your data, you've established your completeness. Now is also a question of how do you keep your data up to date? Because, for example, if you enter information for a particular object at point A in time, it is not likely that that information is going to be the same a year from now. So it's vital that you know when objects or views need to be updated. That is part of your life cycle of these objects. So what we try to do something called we try to establish something like object stillness. So how do you check objects that have not been changed for a while? And the same thing goes for views. How do you check for views that are not updated regularly? I've also prepared some reports about that. So for example, a list of objects that have been changed lately. So what we have here is a view which is sorted on when it was last changed, when the most recent changes are on top. We can also change that the other way around. Let's do that actually. Let's change it the other way around. It's a bit more interesting that way, I guess. So let's do it from oldest first. So these are objects that have not been changed at all. Has been changed last year. Now you can also filter out objects that are not interesting. For example, I could say, well, do only application functions and application components. Obviously, you will get the oldest objects first. Now let's take application components. And you might say that this application, the Scala Machine Master, has not been changed a lot. Has been changed almost more than a year ago for the first time. Same goes for this application. Let's say you want to reach out to the person that did the last change for this. For example, let's take this application Inno360 and give our colleague a little ping whether he should update this application. Let's find the application here. And we'll see that indeed it was last edited by Sven on July 22nd last year. Let's use our new notification bell features and messages to give him a ping real quick. So I'm going to say, Sven, could you take a look and see if this info is still up to date? Sorry, still up to date. When I post this message, Sven will get a notification similarly to the one I have here whenever he logs into BlueDolphin, so that he can pick up my comment and maybe change or update some of the information. And I can run this report a week later and see if anything has progressed. Obviously, I can also use the guest link functionality for this, or I can just send him a mail with the link. But there's multiple ways of making sure that these objects are updated regularly. And you can keep track of them in these kinds of lists. One thing that's also interesting is looking at how busy or how much activity there actually is within the BlueDolphin site with regards to changes or edits. So what I have here is all the changes in objects over a period of time. Well, this site was obviously convised of and set up somewhere around July last year. That's why you see a lot of different changes on particular days. And you see that the rest of the year, there is some spikes, but it's relatively quiet when it comes down to object changes. So what this tells me is that there's not as much activity as I might like to be. So I can zoom in on particular time frames and see how the activity is going on for objects. I think this is a good way to show the kind of the activity in your site. The same thing, as I told before, with the controlling of your data and the completeness of your data, this also goes for views. Most of our users do changes on views, so you want to make sure what view was last changed and what views have not been changed a lot. This is the same kind of view as with objects. Also states the last changed on, which is now sorted from last changed, from the newest ones. Let's also move that around. As an example, let's change that sorting up there so that the last change is on top. You might want to add some filters that filter out some views, for example, so that only the relevant views are kept track of. But you can see that I probably need to check out this view here because it was changed only a long time ago. So another thing that we added is the number of elements on that particular view and who it was shared with. So once again, it's a way to keep your governance, your data quality in check by getting in contact with the people that are in charge of a particular view and see if they updated those views regularly. The same thing that we did for objects, we can also do that for views, obviously. And this view is a little bit different. It shows you all the activity on views for a particular time frame and also who changed them. And kind of here you kind of see the same pattern where when the site was just coming to be, there was a lot of changes. This was a particular busy day where there was a lot of changes to views, or a lot of views were changed. Actually should say that. There was the amount of views that have been changed on a particular day, and also who changed them. And so you can see around the current time there's been more changes than around this period. So also this also gives you kind of an overview of what the activity in your site is. This goes for all sites. By the way, this goes for all kinds of views: argument views, BPMN, and logical data views. We could even do a filter on those as well. And also something you want to know maybe is who's changing the most. So who's the most active? Who are the most active people within this particular site? For example, we have the top changers here, which is the people who made the most changes on all objects. Now you see this big chunk here. My colleague Jordi, he changed 233 objects in here. Myself, other people, and it gives you kind of idea who is the most busiest in this site. This is not limited to a time frame. Also, although we could change it using a filter. For example, we could say, well, who's been the busiest since January? Oh, sorry. And that'll probably change some stuff. So the changes, the data changes because I changed the date. So those are ways of changing or keeping the data you have up to date. Particular objects, you don't want stale objects in your site, and you also don't want stale views in your site. And beside that, a little bit of bonus, you can see what the activity is within the site and how much activity you have in general. Any questions on this? I don't think we have any new questions here, Malia.
No questions so far, no.
All right, let's move on. So you have your control, you have all the objects, you have them all complete, you have a way or a process of keeping them up to date. Now, what to do with this information? And obviously this can go quite a few different directions. I'll show you one direction that is probably applicable to all the sites that you have, no matter what is in there. But the main goal here is use your architecture model. Use the information that you have in this site to gain more insight. For example, one of the things that is very much requested and also used quite a lot is something called overlap detection. Where does overlap between, for example, application functions occur, or between processes occur? Another thing that we see a lot is you want to get insights on collaboration. Who is sharing stuff? Who is sharing views with other people, for example? Start with the first one, the overlap detection. This report is a report which you might have seen before, but what it states is that it shows you the application functions on this axis, the vertical one. It shows application components on the x-axis. And what you can detect now is where are application functions which are provided by multiple applications. For example, this one. Let me zoom in a little bit. I'm not sure if that's possible, but for example, these two applications, HR system, we have two applications in this site which provide the application functionality HR system. It's the Qualtrics application and the SAP application. Now these views are usually used in application portfolio management to see any form of rationalization that you want to use, for example. And this is really an ideal way of showing that. We could also flip them around and, for example, do business processes applications. So here are our business processes, here are our applications. Now this is not as heavy as the last one because, for example, it's very well possible to use multiple applications for the same process. This is not something that is bad per se, but it does give you that insight on these on the processes versus applications. One final thing I want to show you in this is, for example, checking out data attributes versus data objects. I'm not sure when you people use the data module, but if you do, it's interesting to take a look at example attributes versus data objects. So let me give you some background there. Let me give you a view where this comes from. So what we've done here, we've modeled our data objects. Here we are. This is the data module for BlueDolphin, and we've modeled our data objects using attributes. And we want to see where there are overlapping attributes. So where are attributes used more than once? This will give you the overview. For example, we see here that status field is used in quite a few objects. It's used in the client contract, in the energy consumed table, in the grid station table, solar panel transaction table. So here you can see the use of your attributes distributed over different data objects, which can be interesting when you're looking at something like canonical data models or master data management. Once again, you can set this up for any combination of applications, or any combinations of object types. Look at most shared views. Basically, what we see here is a view or a report which shows all the views we have ordered by whom that view was shared with. Now this can be interesting because most likely is that if you share a view with somebody else in BlueDolphin, you are likely to do it because somebody else needs to change your view. So this kind of goes into how you can collaborate, how many people are collaborating with each other in different views. For example, this particular view, the Liberty Energy Portal Solution Architecture, is shared with 6 people, so it's likely that multiple people will perform changes on it. So there's also likely that a lot of changes will occur there. Same goes for everything down the line. Obviously, there's also views that have 0 collaborators. These are personal views or maybe public views, but they only have an owner and are not shared with anybody else. One other one to gain insight on your usage, which is a kind of a different graph than the one I showed you before. These are the changes over time on objects by person. Also shows you a little bit about who is most active in what part and where's the activity within your site. So there's a lot of more examples to give you, but that's really up to you and what objects type do you have, what information do you have in questionnaires, what kind of relationship and views you have created. But hopefully you'll see that you can use these kinds of reports to get a better insight on your data. Any questions on this? Yes?
Yes, we have a few questions, Tom. The first one's from Edwin. He really likes the reports you are showing. Nice to see and good to use. Last year, it was said that the internal reporting BlueDolphin was going to be switched off. Are there any is there anything you know about that, or internal reporting is
as you're aware, I think this is Edwin's question, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so what he's asking for is that we've said before that our roadmap is that we are switching off the internal reporting, or actually not switching off, but we're changing it to something else. Actually, what we have on our roadmap is something called in-context reporting. And in-context reporting states that we are doing reporting-like functionality, but adding it to the views option in BlueDolphin. So we want to interact really with views and then, for example, be able to report on data inside of those views. That will mean that the current BI functionality will be replaced with that. This was supposed to be on our roadmap for 2020. It's been pushed off a little bit, so it's not on the roadmap for 2020 anymore. But it is still something we are planning to do. So it's still something that we're going to be changing the built-in reporting functionality eventually. It will be available at least till the end of the year, and obviously, if we will start to add the new functionality, we're figuring out how to do, for example, a little bit of migration to that new form. But I understand your question, but so far it's still there. Hope that is a satisfactory answer.
A question from Jon. Why use reporting for objects overlap? Conditional layout is nicer to look at.
I understand. Certainly, what Jon is basically saying is, well, why do you have these kinds of reports? For example, the overlap report, like so, when you also have something like this. Let me show you that real quick. You can also use a view. For example, here's my application overview. And basically what I can do, I can do the same thing. These are my applications, and I now can plot, for example, my application functions on top of it. This is actually the same as this is. The thing is that it depends on whether you have a single view across all your domains that holds all the applications, for example. So I know some of the larger instances of BlueDolphin, they have so many applications that you can't possibly put them on a single view. And then a report is more interesting, used as an analysis tool. But you do understand in a smaller environment that this might be sufficient.
Okay, a question from Stefan. I see mostly numbers, like shared with 3 people in the most shared viewed report. Can we drill down in the report to see the actual users?
Yes, you can. No, I do not have that set up. So that would require a little bit changes in the data source that I'm using, but yeah, you can definitely do that. We have that information at least. So it would be possible to create that report and then drill down, or at least show all the users that are collaborators on that view. Yes, you could.
Okay. And Edwin says, thanks for the answer to my previous question. When do we get data on views in the OData interface?
That's not planned yet. That's something that we keep pushing onto the agenda with the product owner. But so far it's not there. So obviously that's something that you need for you to use OData fully. We're aware of that, and but since as of now it's not planned yet on a roadmap anywhere. And then I think we skipped a question from Martin. Is it possible to create a report of valid relations? And I think you're referring, Martin, to the fact that if you look at a relationship list, you have created relationships in your model which are not valid anymore. They turn red, for example, here, and you want to have a report on that. It is not possible in the way that I'm using reporting right here. I know that I've had colleagues of mine which have done these kinds of analysis. I think if you have that particular problem, we should take it up with the account management, and we'll see if we can get a more fine-tuned solution for you there. I think those were the ones, right?
Jan has another question. Would it be possible to report on objects on a certain view only?
You mean as in filtering, Jan? Because I've shown you that you can see which objects are on a particular view, obviously. Or are you referring to filtering on specific set of application, filtering a specific set of objects? I'm not sure what you mean by that. Could you elaborate on that? And then we'll pick that up later, I guess. So we can go on now.
Okay.
So a little bit about dashboarding. I'm using Power BI for some examples. Some of you already use that. But basically, I'm using the OData feed, where I connect BlueDolphin to any BI tool that can handle OData protocol. And what are dashboards most used for in this case? Totalizations, totalizational objects, relationships, and some details. As Edwin asked in his question, there is no data on views or users or roles inside of OData yet. And I've put in a link on how to use OData. The example I want to show you is I've created a Power BI visualization real quick. And these are really generic visualizations, meaning that they only report on stuff that everybody has in its site. So it's not about detailed questionnaires that you might have, but it's about things that are always there. For example, relationship and objects and completeness. For example, number of objects per object type. So you know what objects are represented a lot and which ones are virtually non-existent. That can also be visualized in a pie chart. So you'll see that this site relies heavily on the amount of application functions in there. Then there's a lot of deliverables in there, some business capabilities. So there's kind of a breakdown of where does your site consist of. And on the right upper hand corner, we have the average completeness per object type. So let's say you have done your control. Right. So you set questionnaires, you set your completeness levels for all these object types. Then ideally, you want to see them all on 100%. Not in this case, because there's only a couple of that are filled in even. So you can see how much completeness do you have across the object types. Obviously, this also depends on whether you have questionnaires and whether you have completeness for those particular object types, but I guess you get the idea. Then something about relations per object type. For example, my application components have 269 relationships, meaning that they accumulate quite a lot of relations within the entire site. And then it breaks down in all the other stuff. So how many relationships there are. Now going a little bit of detail about objects. This is a tree map stating actually the largest blocks are the blocks with the most objects, but also the ones with the most relationships. So basically it means that application components in general have the most relationships, and it breaks down in each different object types that it has a relationship with. And when you go down to some of the smaller ones, you'll see that nodes, for example, only have connection to technology services and technology functions, and there are not a lot of them. So this kind of gives you an idea of how the ratios are for particular object types. So data about relations can be held. Also, what are the predominant types of relationships? Well, obviously right here, it's associations mostly. And there's some compositions, and it breaks down to all the different types as well. And then in this tree map, it's a little bit different. It also states, once again, the largest or most number of relationships have the largest blocks. And you also see that, for example, application components has a lot of assignments, some associations. You can also drill down into that if you like. Then a little bit more detail. So this top table shows you all the objects in your site and then sorted on who has the most relationships. So this object called vision, which is probably related, has the most relationship with any other object. And also shows you where those, what kind of relations it has. Below here are objects without relationships, which can be important as well. As I showed you before, you want to have, if you have a convention which says, okay, I need application components to have at least one connection to another object or to another application function, you can also do a check here. You'll see here that application functions, there are 92 application functions which are not connected to any other object. That could mean two things. It can mean that I'm not done with my control yet. I'm not done with my completeness yet. I still have a lot of applications which need application functions. But in that case, I will also have a lot of application functions that do not have relationships. But I only have 3 of them. Actually, if I click on it, it will filter that list here and show you exactly what objects do not have a relation. But coming back on those application functions, it might very well be that the second option is that I have way too much application functions defined, which are not used anywhere in my application landscape. So the question is, does my application function list actually, is it actually a realistic list? And what I showed you already is that you can just pick one of these, something from the pie here, and it will filter down all the objects without relationships and also show the completeness. So for example, if you say, well, you know, my actors always need a relationship, or my stakeholders, then I can just go into this list and see why I can see all the objects that do not have relationships. It's similar to the report I showed you about the completeness of objects and the completeness of relationships within objects. But Power BI in general and other BI tools in general are usually capable of a little bit more visualization. Also, the OData feed has, for example, the opportunity to create visualizations that, for example, show you the relationship on a deeper level than a single level. For example, in the built-in BlueDolphin level, a built-in BlueDolphin tool, you can only see a relationship from one object to another. You could use OData to do from object A to object B, from object B to object C, and do that whole flow, basically. So a little bit about dashboarding. Any questions on this? I think we have.
No questions on this subject, but a reaction from Jan on your question. I don't know if you want to discuss this now or later.
What is the answer?
About a PSA view. I would like to export information on only the objects on that PSA view.
All right, so Jan de Baat, indeed. There are multiple Jans, indeed. Yeah, good one. Well, you could come up with a data source. Actually, I think we have it, which gives you information on only those objects on that particular view. So let me show you that right away. So once he has a particular view, in this case, a project start architecture view, which contains, I guess, a series of objects. Let's take this as an example again, as this is not a PSA, but let's say you want to know what objects are on this particular view, right? What you could do is go into reports, and then I have something called objects on views. And I could filter that down to a particular view. So what this view already does, it shows you all the applications on that particular view, on this particular one. So I guess that is also something that I also already showed you, I guess. Let's see if that's enough information. To do a quick wrap up before we go into the Q&A, the extended Q&A. So what I've shown you is how to govern your data using control reports. The first step basically in your site. Then keeping your data up to date using reports that signal your data quality and changes that have been done on objects. Use the data or give you some examples of using the data in your model to gain more insights. Use dashboards. Kind of give you continuous insight in the state of your architecture and give you a little bit of different ways of visualizing information. Now, to the questions that are still open. Nadja, do we have any more?
No. No new questions, but you promised to explain the first question in the Q&A, right? About the graph visualizer for applications?
Yes, good one. Okay, so as I just told you, there's a way of at least showing relationships between object A to B to C to D. There's a way of showing that in reports, but there's also a way of doing that in BlueDolphin itself, which is not really reporting related, but there's a possibility. So let's open a view, an empty one. And I'm just going out on a limb here a little bit, but let's see how far we can go. Let's just create a new view and just, for example, get an application in here. I don't know. Let's do BlueDolphin itself. Let's see what's in there. So what you can do is you're interested in what applications, for example, how one application is connected to another application. So there's multiple ways to do that. One of them is I already know that there's a relationship, but it's not a direct relationship. I can show you that. So let's say if there's any relation between BlueDolphin and, I don't know, this particular application. What you could do, what you already could do, is now click on the relationship tool and connect these two. And then instead of adding a new one, if any derived relationship is there, it should pop up below here. It's not popping up, so there's no indirect relationship between BlueDolphin and Inno360. Let me add one where there is a relationship to show you how that works. So here it is. So between BlueDolphin and exact globe, there is a derived relationship. There are no direct relationship, but there is a derived relationship. I can click that and we'll draw a more bluish line here stating that there is a relationship. So somewhere down this path, there is a relationship between this application component and the other one. Another way of doing it is simply by saying, all right, give me all indirect or derived relationships with this object with any other object. So I should choose the type of object for this example application component. And then if I click OK, it will start plotting out all the derived relationship that the BlueDolphin object has with any other application object. Now this could get messy because in a well-connected model, it could be that everything is connected to everything. So let's see what happens. Also says adding all object to view could take some time. You want to continue? Yes, continue. I haven't done this before, so I don't know what we're going to get as a result, but obviously we're getting a lot of applications here. We get a lot of connections. Either be direct connections like so. This is a direct connection, or be overlapping connections. So that's how you can do that in a view. Not really reporting related, but hope that answer satisfies your question. Any more? Any new ones we got in?
No, no other questions so far.
All right. So then we're down to the end of the webinar. I'd like you to invite, if you have any additional questions, you want to have a quick 15-minute call with me about the webinar regarding these subjects, drop me a line and we can set something up and see if we can help you real quick, or maybe get you in contact with other people who can help you. Please join other webinars if they're of interest of you. Check our website, valueblue.com/webinars. The next one is June 4th, which is next week somewhere, which is about architecture capability maturity assessment and enterprise architecture. So if you're interested in that, please sign up for that and keep us. We'll keep you informed about other webinars as well. Please, you'll receive an email with an evaluation form, a feedback form, the slides, and the replay of the webinar. I would very much like that you do some feedback so we can improve our webinars. And for now, thanks. Hope to see you next time, and enjoy your afternoon.